Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my Hungary or Hungarian ring post-race reaction. What was your thoughts on this race? Did it fulfill your interest? Did it have the action that you wanted? I thought it was a quite interesting race with the different strategies that ended up playing out, even though I don't think they were quite designed that way before the race. But with that one stop coming into a play, I think it really affected how the other teams reacted and how they were going to play out this race. Now they started off, wanting to try to bar against the undercut, and then they started trying to think about the overcut with Lando Norris as he went long, and some of the other people that went long on those one stops to see if they were going to be able to overcut, the people in front of them, and maybe even, be just behind them, but be on better tires, and so that they'd have to worry about the passing, from the fresher tire set. But what was your thoughts? I mean, as I said, I thought mine was fairly interesting. I thought it was fairly active as well. Maybe not all of the drivers, but a lot of the drivers had pretty good action as well in this track, which was not expected in my viewpoint, but it ended up being quite an interesting and enjoyable race in my opinion. And just like normal, I go through the back of the pack, working my way to the front of the pack, going through each driver, trying to tell you what I know happened to them and what went on with their race. So without further ado, we'll start off with Oliver Bearman, who started off in 11th and ended up in 20th with a DNF after 49 laps due to some rear end damage, which I could not actually figure out where that happened at. But he ended up some floor and wing rear end damage that just ended up losing his traction on his car, and they ended up just pulling it in as it was deemed not worth driving around any longer. This gets us to Pierre Gasly, who started off in 16th and ended up in 19th. He did lose 3 spots at the very first lap. He did have a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 32, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards. He did pass Franco Colapinto for 18th on lap 5 and passed Bearman for 14th on lap 46. He passed Sainz for 14th on lap 62 and had some wheel-to-wheel contact with Sainz as well, earning him a 10-second penalty for causing a collision. So that kind of dropped him back to the back of the pack. Otherwise, he was doing so-so, but not the greatest in that result. And I know the Alpines were having a hard time this race, and hopefully they can get their act together after the summer break and be able to get some points as well. And right ahead of Pierre Gasly was his teammate Franco Colapinto, who started off in 14th and ended up in 18th. He did lose 4 spots at the very beginning of the race on that very first lap, and he had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 13, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, taking those hards to lap 35 before switching to another set of hards. Other than that, he had a pretty boring race, just dropping back in the pack, not really able to take that Alpine where he wanted it to go. This gets us to Yuki Tsunoda, who started off in 20th and ended up in 17th. He started off in the pit lane due to power unit parts changes in Parc Ferme, so that made him start from the pit lane and dropping him down to that 20th spot to start off with. He also had a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 20, switching from a set of mediums to a set of softs, taking those softs to lap 37 before switching to a set of hards. It really wasn't Yuki's day, as he ended up dropping back farther into the pack, not gaining any ground, and actually getting outdone by his sister team with that Liam Lawson and Isaac Kaijar as well. So that's not a very good day for Yuki Tsunoda, and hopefully that is just this remnants of this last bit of this first part of the season, and he can gather himself back up for the second half of the season and be able to push forward and get some points and to kind of show that he deserves to be in that primary seat in the Red Bull. Esteban Ocon started off in 17th and ended up in 16th. He did gain 2 spots in the very first lap. He had a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 14, so fairly early, switching from those set of mediums to a set of hards, and that worked fairly well for him until the end of the race, where those hards were just worn out and he was starting to get passed quite a bit, not being able to maintain those positions on that worn tire. He also got a black and white flag on lap 50, and I didn't quite catch what that was for, but he was, waved, and so he potentially could have gotten another penalty due to that black and white flag if things worked out. Fortunately for him, things didn't quite go that far, and so he was able to stem that penalty from that point. This gets us to Alexander Albon, who started off in 19th, then worked his way up to 15th. He gained 3 spots at the very first lap. He did a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 14, switching from a set of softs to a set of mediums, and taking that set of mediums to lap 38 before switching to a set of hards. He did pass Gasly for 16th on lap 65 and passed Ocon for 15th on lap 67. Again, Williams was having a rough weekend this weekend, not really able to go anywhere in pre-practice sessions or during the qualifying, of course, dropping back in that pack, not getting quite past Q1. And then the race didn't turn out any better for them in that regard either. So they were kind of in the back of the pack, trying to learn some lessons, trying to get some data, trying to figure out what's going on with that Williams car. And hopefully they have that data and they can, churn on that when they get a chance after their, summer break and come out strong. And of course, they're right ahead of his, Alexander Albon is his teammate, Carlos Sainz, who started off in 13th, so quite a bit farther ahead of his teammate, but ended up dropping down to 14th. He did gain 1 spot at the very first lap, did a 2-stop strategy like his teammate, stopping on lap 15, switching from those set of softs that they started on to a set of hards, taking that hard all the way to lap 51, so quite a bit longer stint before switching to a set of mediums, but that didn't really help Carlos at all in that run. He did pass Yuki for 17th on lap 53, passed Hulkenberg for 16th on lap 59, then he swapped places with his Albon for 15th on lap 60, passed Gasly for 14th on lap 62, passed Gasly again for 15th on lap 64 because he had to go off track a little bit and kind of lost some positions, had to regain those. And he passed Ocon for 14th on lap 66 where he ended up. So he had pretty good action, pretty good going, but kind of due to a few circumstances, he couldn't quite make it up to the point range, and so he kind of fell back into that 13th, 14th positions, not really able to gain much ground from there. Again, he did a lot of passing, which is probably a lot of fun for him, but it wasn't really great for the Williams team in general. Then this gets us to Nico Hulkenberg, who started off in 18th and ended up in 13th. He gained a spot at the very first lap. He did gain a 5-second penalty for a false start, where he just inched that a little bit forward, not even knowing to him, according to the radios that we heard over in the race, saying it was a news to him that he was going to had a false start, but it wasn't the really bad false start, so they only gave him a 5-second penalty, which did push him back a little bit because he had to take that on that first pit stop that he did, and he did that, with that lap 5, where he did a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 5, switching from a set of softs to a set of mediums, taking that set of mediums to lap 41 before switching to a second set of mediums. He did pass Yuki for 14th on lap 20. He did pass Albon for 16th on lap 61, passed Sainz for 15th on lap 62, passed Gasly for 14th on lap 64, and passed Ocon for 13th on lap 65. He also had a 3 track limit violations going on, so if he had another track limit as well, he might have gone off and gotten a penalty for that. So with that, it's kind of a Nico Hulkenberg's run. He did pretty good to get back up from 13th, but he couldn't quite get up far enough to do a good job and get those points. But at one point, he was coming out and giving his teammate a boost by getting running interference as he came back out on track after his pit stop. So overall, a team player, and Nico Hulkenberg did an excellent job in that aspect, even though his whole race was kind of bad in general, gaining some ground, but not near enough to where he could really get close to those points, but not quite enough to give him the motivation to really push forward and get that last point. Then we come to Lewis Hamilton, who started off in 12th and ended up in 12th. He lost 2 positions on the very first lap. He did a 1-stop strategy, stopping on lap 42, switching from a set of hards to a set of mediums. And I think he was one of the few, if not the only person who started off on a set of hard tires. He did get pushed off track by Max Verstappen on lap 29 on turn 5, which still hasn't been decided on last time I looked. So there's some discussion there to see if Max is going to get a penalty for that, because he kind of came in strong, and to avoid action and collisions, Lewis ran off and lost a few positions due to that as well. So we'll have to wait and see if that comes through or not. I don't think it'll actually affect the results because the gap between Max and the people behind them was quite large. So we'll have to see how that is done and what his penalty is for that. But anyway, Lewis Hamilton passed Gasly for 14th on lap 49, passed Ocon for 13th on lap 50, and passed Sainz for 12th on lap 51. You know, as he said, you know, he was having a miserable weekend. He thought he was useless for the Ferrari going into this, you know, bad qualifying sessions, and it didn't seem like he, you know, gained that much ground in this race, still in 12th place. So he's saying, you know, after the race, he was still in that same boat on his mindset, saying he didn't really deserve, you know, this race in the sense of, you know, where he stood and understanding the car and being able to get the most out of that car for Ferrari. So he's still in the dumps. Hopefully that'll just clear out over the break and has he some time to rest and relax, and he'll come back strong after the break and, you know, show what he can do in that Ferrari, as they've gotten some updates for that Ferrari and they're kind of piecing those together. So hopefully that'll come to him after the summer break. And this gets us to the 11th spot, where we find Isaac Haijar, who started off in 10th and dropped a spot to 11th. He lost that spot at the very first lap. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 33, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards. He did pass Behrman for 16th on lap 38, and he passed Ocon for 12th on lap 44, and he passed Sainz for 11th on lap 47. Isaac did a pretty good job on that, just getting just outside the points, not quite able to overtake Kimi. I know he was right there on the edge of Kimi Antonelli going around in his very last laps, really putting pressure on Kimi, so just not quite able to overtake him. So a decent race for Isaac Haijar. I know it's not quite where he wanted to be, as his first half of the season was a lot better in that regard, and he's had a few races now that are kind of slacking off a little bit. I think he can rejoin after the summer break and be able to really attack again and have that, you know, confidence and ability to push forward as a rookie in this era. And this gets us to our top 10, where we find Kimi Antonelli, who ended up in that 10th spot after starting off in 15th, made it all the way up to that last point scoring position, did a really good job, gaining 2 spots in the very first lap, had a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 21, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and he passed Ocon for 13th on lap 40 and passed Carlos Sainz for 10th on lap 45. As I said, he did a fairly good job getting himself back into that points position, not quite where he probably wanted to be, but a really good job for him to push himself into that points position and maintain that. As a rookie himself, and I know there's been a lot of pressure on him lately due to, you know, him not being at the positions where people are thinking that he should work his way up to, and the qualifying sessions kind of being iffy lately. I think that things are just going to come together for him. I think he gained that break over the summer will help him, you know, clear his mind, where he can just start focusing back on his racing. So I think he'll do good, at least straight off, you know, the break. We'll see how it plays out for the rest of the season. Then we kind of come to a surprise in my viewpoint, where we find Max Verstappen, who started off in 8th and ended up in 9th. So not a really good race at all for Max Verstappen, who we expect to be up near the front of the field. He did lose 1 spot on that very first lap as well, so not the greatest start from him. He did a 2-stop strategy, stopping on lap 17, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and then going to lap 48 on those set of hards before switching to a second set of hards. He did some good action. He did pass Lawson for 8th on lap 2, passed Stroll for 7th on lap 3, passed Yuki for 15th on lap 20, passed Hulkenberg for 13th on lap 21, passed Gasly for 12th on lap 24, passed Hamilton for 11th on lap 29, and he passed Isaac Haijar for 10th on lap 30. So he did quite a bit of passing, at least at the very first part of this race, and then kind of got into that rhythm where he couldn't quite make the grounds he needed. I know he kind of complained about the car and the tires and the situation they were in a little bit I know at one point they were potentially looking at a one-stop race, but I think those tires were just worn out by then. So he didn't really give him a chance to push towards that one-stop error, as it would have been fairly hard to make that happen. Pretty horrible run for him, qualifying, down in, that 8th position, not where he wants to be, not where we usually see him, and then not having the greatest race at all in that, losing a position as well. We don't normally see Max doing that. We usually see him coming through the field to that front, gaining some decent points anyway, but not quite where he wanted to be. And I think it'll be a good break for him to just wipe that from his mind and let him come back focused. I know he says he's not going to win a race the rest of the season, but I still see him, chasing out those positions and see potentially, if something happens, taking the lead there and winning a race, at least putting pressure on those front runners. So I think we'll see him come back in the second half of the season. He's done a fairly decent job, I think, with that Red Bull, as it's not where they want it to be, and they were really struggling with that setup, being on knife edge where it falls out of that running line quite a bit if it's not just perfect conditions. Then we get to Liam Lawson, who started off in 9th and ended up in 8th. He did one spot at the very first lap. He did a one-stop race, stopping on lap 40, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and he passed signs for 9th on lap 43. Now, I think Liam Lawson's done a really good job here, getting back up into the points and doing a good job. Being ahead of Max Verstappen always helps in that regard, showing that he can be a leader. And he was ahead of his own teammate, Isaac Hydjar, in those Racing Bulls as well. So I think that helps as well. So between those aspects, he was the lead car for the Red Bull teams, both the main team and the sister team. So that was a really good job from him in this race. So I think kudos to Liam Lawson in this race of coming out and getting pretty good points for him in this regard. This leads us to Lance Stroll, who started off in 6th and ended up in 7th. He did lose one spot at the very first lap. He did a one-stop race, stopping on lap 36, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards. And he did pass Hulkenberg for 9th on lap 40. A decent run from Lance Stroll, even though he lost a spot. Those Aston Martins weren't quite as good. And I know his teammate did really good in this race. But as those Aston Martins are really struggling this season, I think that was a pretty decent job from Lance Stroll to maintain that and get some decent points, as well as, getting up there into that 7th position, holding back a lot of the drivers behind him as well. So good job from him. This gets us to Gabriel Borletto, who started off in 7th and ended up in 6th. He gained one spot at the very first lap. He did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 40, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and he was also voted the driver of the day. Now, that's a really good job, because I think that's the highest he's ended up this season in his F1 career. So that's really good to see. Doing a good job. Didn't get a lot of action, but was not able to push forward, but not really good job for holding everybody back as well. Maintaining that position, actually gaining the position during this race, which you normally wouldn't see in those stake cars either. So I think he did an excellent job and probably deserves the driver of the day, because there wasn't just a tremendous amount of craziness in the sense of what we would expect from my driver of the day, coming back from the field, back of the field to the front of the field, or holding off a tremendous amount, not making those mistakes and just being a perfect drive. So overall, I think he deserved the driver of the day. If it wasn't for him, I could potentially give it to Lando for, even though he messed up at the very beginning, being able to maintain that one stop and hold off his teammate near at the end. Or I could give it to, Fernando Alonso for doing a really good job in that Aston Martin in that 5th position and being able to do basically what Gabriel did, but in an Aston Martin. Of course, he's a lot more experienced, so I could definitely see this, rolling down and giving it to Gabriel Borletto because of his run in this race. You too can be the driver of the day in my viewpoint by just hitting that like and subscribe. This gets us to our top 5, where we find Fernando Alonso, who started off in 5th and ended up in 5th. He did gain one spot at the very first lap, did a one-stop strategy, stopping on lap 39, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards. So I think he was one of the longer drives on that set of mediums to do this one-stop strategy, maintained that throughout this race, and did a fairly good job, especially since he was having those muscle issues in his back, and was able to not perform in that first practice session and just sat outside on that run, and then coming back, for the rest of the weekend and then having a really good result is always uplifting and really good for him. And, Wildy, Fernando, he was enjoying this race quite a bit, I think. And it sounded like that over his interview after the race, saying it was really good results. And we'll have to see where those Aston Martins can learn from and try to figure out for the rest of the season. So there's still some work to be done in the Aston Martins. I don't think they've really learned, especially after the previous race where they were just out of it completely. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but I think this is a really good uplifting, race for Fernando Alonso. This leads us to Charles Leclerc, who started off in first and ended up in fourth. He had a two-stop strategy, stopping on lap 19, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and taking those set of hards to lap 40 before switching to a second set of hards. He had a decent start, keeping the lead. He passed Alonso for second on lap 21. He did gain a 5-second penalty for erratic driving when he was, trying to keep George Russell behind him, and that cost him a little bit of time, but it didn't really cost him any positions because there was a gap enough between him and Fernando Alonso in that result. So he didn't really affect him in that regard, but it was kind of frustrating to see a little bit of him getting frustrated and just trying to do everything he could to keep George behind him. I know he was really frustrated with the strategies that were going on, complaining over the radio a lot. It ended up being some other issues that were going on in that car after the race that he was told about. So they were kind of out of their control in that regard, when he was thinking that there were some issues that he was thinking that there were, but they were in the control of the pit crew and the telemetry. So in that result, I think he started to come back around after the race and after he started talking. And I think after they have a formal debrief of this race, they'll be fine. But during that race, I know he was complaining quite a bit about the strategy, about losing that first position, not cutting it off, not looking at those strategies for Lando and just looking at it for Oscar in the sense, and then dropping back even farther off the podium and into that fourth position. So I could very see it being frustrating for him in that Ferrari, but a decent run. Hopefully they can look out and figure out what all is going on with that Ferrari, because they're kind of falling apart here and there, and hopefully they can get that back in order. I know they brought some upgrades, so maybe it was related to those, but get all those settled out and get those where they can really be more competitive against the McLaren. So it'd be really cool to see them fighting the McLarens for the rest of the season. This gets us to George Russell, who started off in fourth and ended up in third. He had a one spot gained on that very first lap. He did a two-stop strategy, stopping on lap 19, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, taking that set of hards to lap 43 before switching to a second set of hards. He did pass Bortoleto for fifth on lap 21. He passed Alonso for fourth on lap 26, passed Leclerc for third on lap 62, and had the fastest lap of the race on lap 45. So he was doing a really good job. I know that Mercedes quite where it needed to be real super competitive against those McLarens, and so they still have some work to be doing on that Mercedes. But it was really good to see him, getting back up there on the podium after all this time and trying to get those last podium positions, trying to put pressure on the Ferrari, and of course, if he could, get a little bit more pressure on the McLarens as well. I know he's quite a far back from that, so it wasn't really any kind of pressure on the McLarens of where that second position was going to end up, but it was still cool to see George Russell making his way up there. And it probably wasn't quite, deemed possible at the very beginning of this race, but it was cool to see that things just worked out and he is able to pull out a podium position. This gets us to Oscar Piastri, who started off in second and ended up in second. He had a two-stop strategy, stopping on lap 18, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, taking that set of hards to lap 45 before switching to another set of hards. He did pass Alonso for third on lap 22 and passed Charles Leclerc for second on lap 51. Now, he was frustrated just because of the strategy went opposite him, close to the lead at one point, and was able to do that and was thinking that he was going to be able to pull out the lead. But because of Lando's awkward start, that strategy just kind of fell to his teammate. And so things were not quite as easy as he was hoping it was going to be. Now, he did put up a really good fight at the end, even doing that bomb, almost taking out his teammate near the end of the race, trying to get that little bit of edge and try to get back up into that first position. It also caused him to get a radio message about how they're supposed to race each other as teammates. But we always love to see those, really tight options and potential passes that we could get in this race. And I know that the battle between them is going to get stronger throughout the rest of the season. So I can't wait to really see those, races and how they play out. Who's going to be end up on top? Who's going to end up having that sad second position? We'll have to wait and see. But Oscar did a really good job. Didn't really do anything wrong. It just kind of fell against him on that strategy, which wasn't even a strategy I don't think a lot of people were looking at the beginning of this race. This gets us to Lando Norris, who started off in third and ended up in that very first position. He did lose 2 spots on the very first lap, so he had a pretty bad start. He kind of was doing a pretty good start, really, but just kind of got caught and had to brake a little more, a little sooner than he was expecting on one of those corners, and that just put him on the backside of the couple of those drivers that were going around him, and he just kind of fell back into that 4th position, and which was really kind of hurt him. And I think he was expecting and oh great, now I'm going to be stuck outside the podium positions. I'm not going to be able to get closer to that. But due to that strategy situation, he was able to make a one-stop work, stopping on lap 31, switching from a set of mediums to a set of hards, and going the rest of the way. He did have to pass Alonso for 4th on lap 3 to get back into that 4th position. So really good run from Lando Norris in that sense, that being, a bad start for him due to the conditions that were handed to him, and then being able to take that and make a different strategy work in that competitiveness for the McLarens that we can now see, because they're so far ahead in that constructor standings, that they're willing to take a little bit more risk involved between their 2 team members and do that alternate strategy and really push forward and see if that works. And it actually did play out for him. So a really good run from him, and then he was able to maintain that first position, even though his teammate was just gaining ground with leaps and bounds at the end of the race, almost taking him over like a couple of laps from the end, but still able to maintain that lead, defending quite well in general, not making that mistakes that would have cost him the lead in this race in that first position. So a really good job from Lando Norris. Really good job in that whole scene. I think this race was kind of interesting, as I said, with the different strategies that kind of got thrown in there at the end, not quite expecting it to be the primary strategy for this race, but ended up doing a really good job and getting that tension going at the end of this race between those drivers and a couple of other team members as well. So that kind of played out across this race, giving that extra edge, extra enjoyment for me in this race. Now, to show you how this race went, I'll go through a few of the laps that I recorded on the gaps between the first place and the second. So by lap 5, it was a 2.5 second lead for Charles Leclerc over Oscar. By lap 10, it was up to 2.62 second lead for Leclerc over Oscar. By lap 15, it was a 3-second lead for Leclerc over Oscar. By lap 35, it was a 1.91 second lead for Charles Leclerc over Oscar. And then we had some changes up due to the pit strategies. So we had lap 50, we had a 9.08 second lead for Lando over Charles Leclerc because of the pit strategies. And then by lap 60, it was a 2.83 second lead for Lando over his teammate Oscar. By lap 65, it was down to a 0.83 second lead for Lando over Oscar. And by the end of the race, it was down to a 0.69 second lead for Lando over Oscar. So right at the end, it was just kind of got down to the wire, nose to tail, trying to figure out where Oscar if he could make it around Lando, and that ended up being a really cool race from my viewpoint. So what did this do to the driver standings? Well, we see Gabriel Bortoleto jumping up to that 17th position now with 14 points. We have Liam Lawson with 20 points, but dropping down to that 15th spot. We have Pierre Gasly, again, tied with 20 points in that 14th spot, dropping back. And Isaac Hydjar with 22 points, dropping back to that 13th position. As Lance Stroll jumps up to that 12th position with 26 points, and Fernando Alonso jumping up to 11th, well, with 26 points as well. So those are nice tied points. So we'll have to figure out in the next race who will win out on those peak drivers and see if they can move up or they're going to be moving down. We also see, of course, Oscar Piastri with 284 points, but that gap between him and his teammate now has dropped down, with Lando Norris now with 275. And for the constructors standings, we see Aston Martin jumping over the Racing Bulls and the Kick Sauber teams, jumping up to that 6th position now with 52 points, with Kick just behind them with 51, and Racing Bulls now with 45. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And of course, Haas still with 35. So we'll see if they can make some points in the second half of the season to bump themselves up, as they've been very close on those points, but not quite making it to that point. So they're lagging behind a little bit. But we see good things from the Racing Bulls as they've been scoring fairly regularly. And of course, Kick coming back in the second half of this, second part of the season, of the first part, and really shining, as we were at the very back of the field at one point, and now they're coming back into that 7th position, doing a really good job themselves. And of course, we see McLaren now with 559, so a very solid lead, not having to worry about anything. But of course, we have those teams behind them with the Red Bulls at 194, a little bit farther behind the Mercedes with 236, and Ferrari with 260. So we'll see how those gaps play out and see if Williams has anything to worry about in that 5th position, as it seems like those back teams are starting to gain ground on them. So what is coming up next? We have the Netherlands, or Zandvoort, on August 31st. So we have like 3 weeks off before we come back for the second part of this season to Zandvoort, who has a length of 2.646 miles, with 72 laps being run for the GP race, for a total race distance of 190.504 miles. It was first introduced in 1952, and the lap record holder is Lewis Hamilton in 2021 with 1 minute 11.097 seconds. So we'll have to wait a few weeks before we see what the results are there, but until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.